producer, so I now know what an executive producer does, which is nothing, except put up some money. So I had no creative input on this movie whatsoever, but I'm happy with how it turned out. I think if you watch it, you'll like it. It's a very Lovecraft-themed thing. And it's filmed as though it took place in 1931, which is when Lovecraft wrote the story. The idea is like, what if Lovecraft was a scriptwriter? It goes on beyond the book, because you couldn't have to in a movie, and so like an hour into the movie, it ends, like the Lovecraft story is over. You see the face and hands of Henry Akeley, and that part's over, and then it goes on another half hour past that, and that's when like it's not so good for hard-to-roll.
Is the movie available on online, right?
It's yeah, you buy it from HBO. It's not, Amazon's not releasing it until June or July or something. I'm not sure why about that. This Blu-ray version, there's 2.5 hours of extras in it. You get lots of stuff.
What do you think about the silent call of Cthulhu?
I loved it. That's why I participated in the Winter in Darkness. The Silent Call of Cthulhu, which I, like I said, absolutely loved. I mean, as far as distribution and stuff, it has flaws. Like it's 47 minutes long, which is not the right length for a movie, and it's silent. So it didn't really fit into like the Sci-Fi Channel or movie shows and stuff. The Call of Cthulhu, the Whisper of Darkness, is more conventional in that regard, though it's still like a Lovecraft story. So it's got great settings. They love the 20s setting, so you could see steam trains and Wisconsin University, which I think is Green Mountain University actually. But
the props are fantastic.
Yeah. And yes, and Andrew, who plays Charles Ford, is spectacular as Charles Ford. He has a debate with the hero, who I can't even think of the name of right now. Wilmarth, yes, Wilmarth. But the guy that plays Wilmarth is terrific. And the guy that, have you seen it?
Yeah.
The guy that plays Akeley, oh my gosh, he has that thing like a laugh. That's so good. Every time you hear it, like, I don't want to laugh anymore. The way my friends described it is, it sounds like a person who understood that laughing was important in human communication, but I've never actually heard one, and he's trying to imitate it, don't you? Right? It's really creepy laugh when he's being the Akeley thing, right? And they do a good build up for the critters, right? Because first like there's the blurry photo, then there's foot tracks, and then there's like one briefly arm behind the little girl, and then
shadows.
Yeah, and I was worried. I knew they had a child actor in it, which I was kind of concerned about because child actors are like the bane of horror movies, and she's good. She's really good. The girl that plays the 11-year-old, she's the daughter of one of the, well, cultists may be the wrong thing to call them. They're like kind of don't have any like.
The farmer being bad.
Farmer, yeah, Masterson. But he has the greatest speech in the movie, I think. Yeah. He says, some things can't be stopped. You can't stop it. You can't stop them. Mankind is done. You know.
Thanks a lot, Sandy and
okay.
Steve. We really appreciate it.
Just right.
Up in Massachusetts, there's a guy named Andre who does Cthulhu games. He has a theater background. He sets up this big room as a self-contained unit, complete with mist machines and bags of color, lights, and isn't it very atmospheric?
Astonishing.
I was in Italy last fall at the Luca convention, painting conference, and there was the Call of Cthulhu, like the Marsh Society there, and those guys were nuts. They had this Italian place, this like dancing cherubs and things. And the climax of that, they had a guy in a big full ego costume. Do I have a picture? Yes.
Oh yeah, that was after the scenario?
That's after the scenario, but he comes out and he's
Flip.
Yeah.
okay.
So basically, the three of them.
Okay, check out this. This is, there you go.
Oh my goodness.
It's on stilts.
That is amazing.
It has an electronic voice box in the screen.
Cool, that's wonderful.
This came out for number one. Well, it was small.
All right.
It's his phone, he knows what to do.
James.
Oh, shut up, I'm sorry, Ted.
James, be nice. Be nice.
Check this out.
Be nice.
This is the ceiling of the room we played the game in. They had an entire band like plain 20s dance music. So I was waltzing around with women, and they had a guy dressed like a 1930s Italian fascist, and everyone was, it was, and we go
Well, hello, everyone. This is Frank Mentzer, Tim Kask, Jim Ward. I guess we're here to talk about the good old days.
Oh, yeah.
And we're also going to talk about Eldritch.
Yeah, towards the end, we'll mention our new endeavor. We're all part of a new company, producing game stuff, etc. Well, let's see. I think Jim is the first person among us to have met Gary. You want to talk about that at all? When was that?
73. He had just produced the brown box set.
there's how I get
73, 74. And
In a bookstore?
in a bookstore, we were every Tuesday I went over to the Lake Geneva News Agency to buy paperback books because they got new ones. And this is kind of an interesting little story. I love telling it. Where I was walking down the aisles getting Elsbrek Conan's and Poole Anderson books, and I wound up with 6 books in my hand, and this strange bearded guy was doing the exact same thing as me, and he wound up with the exact 6 books. And so we looked at each other and we kind of laughed, and he said, you know, I got a game where you can beat Conan, you can fight Seth. And my eyes got real big. I said, what? I was hooked. He had me hook, line, and sinker. So I started going over to his house every weekend and playing. He taught me how to play D&D, he and Brian Bloom. And this was just when the brown box set came out. It cost $10. And I had a family and 2 kids, and I didn't have $10. So I was like 6 months before I could afford the brown box set. And at one time I said to Gary, hey, you need a science fiction version of this. And Gary said, you know, Jim, I don't have time to write it right now. Why don't you give it a try? Now, Gary was always doing nice things like that. He didn't know if I could write. He didn't know what I could do. But I started working on it. He helped me out. And I did Metamorphosis Alpha in 1976. So first science fiction role-playing game is my credit. And I'm dang proud of that credit. So that's my Gary story.
Now, of course, Gary was hanging around Lake Geneva, and he had tried working as it's a fairly well-known story, as a shoemaker, an insurance salesman, various things that didn't work until the Bloom family, folks he knew there in Lake Geneva, put up a little bit of money, their dad did, to facilitate the production of this weird game idea that they had, thanks to input from Dave Arneson up in Minnesota. And Gary there in Lake Geneva, and they knew guys down in southern Indiana, so there's this axis there in the Midwest. The southern Indiana guys did the first publishing of that stuff called Guide and Games. But around that time in the 70s, after Jim and Gary had gotten to know each other, and Jim was angling for a job at TSR, that took a while.
It did.
Although he was writing good stuff, things like Deities and Demigods, or Gods, Demigods, and Heroes, the original supplement number 4. Before that all happened, there was this kid down in south central Illinois, down in Carbondale, college kid, wargamer, who had really gotten into old wargame stuff. And somebody, how did you discover the D&D game?
Well,
Tim Kask.
one thing, I wasn't a kid. I spent 4 years in the Navy, so I came to gaming about 4 or 5 years later than a lot of people in '74. But I was a gamer since '61, and we played chainmail, and that was my introduction to miniatures. And we'd had this monumental game one day, and as always happened with miniatures, fine points came up. And back in those days, miniatures always had a judge, or an umpire, call it what you will, who made those decisions arbitrarily and fairly. But I got this wild hair that I was going to call this guy, the Gygax in Lake Geneva, that wrote him, and just see what he thought about what we did. So I got on, it was long distance directory assistance back then, on Saturday night when the rates were the lowest. And I called and said, you got a guy named, I'm looking for somebody named Gygax. And so, yeah, we have Gary. I said, oh, could I have his number? So I called him up. I said, hi, you don't know me, but I'm a gamer. He says, well, hi, I'm Gary, and I'm a gamer too. And we talked for an hour and a half. And as Jim said, Gary had this deft way of bringing out from you when you asked for something from him. So when I said, well, okay, we had this, whatever it was, thing come up during the game, and his first thing was, well, how did you resolve it? And I said, well, we did this and we did that. And he goes, I can't see any reason I wouldn't have done the same. He never said, this is the way you should have done it. You know, so he's very encouraging that way. So we just struck up a friendship, because during that 90-minute conversation, we found out we liked the same books. We read this, you know, we read all these same things. We enjoyed the same periods of history, because Gary was a history buff, and I'm a retired history teacher. So we have that in common. And he conned me, he talked me into coming to Gen Con in 1974. And he said, oh yeah, we got hundreds of gamers. And I'm going, yeah, okay, sure. My club at college had 14. And so, yeah, and I got this neat new game. It's miniatures on paper without figures. And I said, okay, that certainly sounds interesting. I said, well, how do you play? She's in your head. I said, oh, okay, what else do you play at Gen Con? And so I was married and had a child, and so we drove up from Carbondale, which is way down the tip of southern Illinois, to Moline, where our families were from. I dropped my wife and my daughter, and I went off to Gen Con. I thought I was going off to Gen Con, pocket a little bit of money and a credit card. Well, I got there, found out there was a hotel room at 80 miles, so it's going to be a long day and the drive back. So I played some miniatures games, and I won a couple of them, and then I ran into Gary again. Hey, wow, oh, what have you been doing? Oh, cool. And so we talked about that for a while. And I was sitting in the hallway, and I think it might have been Rob Kuntz, a younger man, walking down the hall. We need people for a game, and this is this thing that Gary had been talking about. And yeah, okay, and I sat at the back of the table, and ended up being killed in about 40 minutes. Cut into little blocks by a laser or something. I wasn't sure what had happened, but I was intrigued. And I didn't want to go home yet. So I played the second game. And I played a dwarf who rescued a dying king and became a baron. And I was going, oh shit, this is pretty, excuse me. This is pretty good. Here I was, I'm a paperweight in this game, and I'm a baron in this game. So I had $15 left. And Gary didn't take, Gen Con didn't take credit cards in 1974. So I was able to afford the game, the box, and a set of dice, but I couldn't afford Greyhawk, which had just come out. So I took it home to my college, and for the next year and a half, Gary and I corresponded, and my group was kind of a playtest group, and they created an opening for my talents, and I went to work for them in 1975, and then all the rest happened.
Tim was the first full-time employee at TSR. Everybody was scraping by on, part-time, whatever. Who was the first? Terry Kuntz? The first employee in general, part-time in the warehouse or something?
Well, yeah, Terry might have been, because he did all the building in the Gray House.
Yeah.
It might have been Ernie.
Yeah, might have been Ernie.
Well, but was he paid?
Yeah, but was he paid?
There's that.
I think the first person we had to pay was probably Terry.
Right.
When we moved from Gary's basement into the old Gray House.
Ernie is Gary's eldest son, for those who don't know. Well, these guys were there like at the start of the entire industry. It's just great. I've been honored to know these guys and be working with them. I'm what we called then second wave. In the 70s, while all this great stuff was going on, I was wasting time in things like college, and we had heard of, a friend of mine showed me D&D in 75, photocopy, of course. Nobody could get a hold of the originals, and it was so expensive, as Jim mentioned, you had to save up for it, so people were making photocopies like mad. And by the late 70s, I was known in the Philadelphia area where I lived, it was one of those typical, what you often may do in your 20s, work a year and then get unemployment a year looking for what you really want to do, and then back on some kind of a job for you, etc. And working in amidst that time, I started running a lot of D&D games, and my friends badgered me into applying for a job at TSR in '79. And lo and behold, they picked me as an editor, although I had no editorial experience whatsoever. But they liked my designs, but they couldn't hire me as a designer because this guy, Moldvay guy, Tom Moldvay, the legendary Ohio designer who did the 1980 D&D set, had got hired for the designer position. So but they wanted me, so Tom and I started in the same office in 1980. After working there for a few months, I did get to know Gary. He tried to make time to meet every new employee at that point, but it was like 75, 80 people at TSR, I think, at the time. Had really grown hugely. But Gary and I eventually got to be good friends, and then after I started the RPGA, he pulled me from that and wanted me to write the D&D set. So then I proceeded to write 5 box sets of rules, and in the long run, tens of millions of copies of my stuff got printed. I must say, somewhat embarrassingly, because I didn't really pioneer any of this stuff. I was just happened to be there at the right time in the right place, and knew Gary, and he appreciated my skills, so things just all came together by luck. Shortly after I arrived, they started hiring these kids. At the time, now I was born in 1950, so I was already in my almost 30 by the time they hired me. And they started hiring these young kids from like out in California and bringing in these wild men. People like Errol Otis back there, and Jeff D., artists with attitude, and I can tell you.
And tentacles.
But yeah, and attitude and tentacles. But they turned out all right. It worked out great. But a lot of us got hired in waves back in that time. There was one group back in the 70s, including Zeb Cook, who's here at the con, one of TSR's top designers, who went on to do most of the work on second edition AD&D, in the late 80s and so on and so forth. But that's basically how we all got to meet Gary, and we were under the impression this was more of a Q&A. We don't really have much prepared, yakking about the old days. We don't know what aspects of the old days you're interested in. So unless there's objection, I'll throw the floor open to any questions you might have. Anything. What was it? TSR, the game, the people, Gary, others? Back in the 70s for them, or 80s really for me. But Jim ended up with TSR through what? Into the 90s?
Well, I got fired for 2 years, and then I got hired back again, and then I left, so 97, 76 to 97.
76 to 97, so off and on,
Math
but
people, yeah.
most of that era. So Jim's the real TSR veteran here, aside from Steve Winter, who was a solid 20 years with him there. I mean, he's here at the con too. Another great guy. Somebody had a hand. We had a victim here.
Yeah, Frank, why don't you tell us how Gary approached you to write the basic edition over again after Tom Mulvey already wrote it?
Okay, well, Tom was having severe health problems. He had an asthmatic condition, and he moved there from Ohio. There were a bunch of other guys from Ohio, including Law Schick, who was head of R&D, Tom Mulvey, I think. Well, anyhow, there were various people in this Ohio crew that had joined. But the weather in Wisconsin, I mean, one year we had a winter fantasy con at the local American Legion, and it hit 20 below, and nobody's car would start, and everybody was sleeping over, things like that. And for an asthmatic, this just didn't cut it, right? So Tom really only stayed for a short while, and then had to let him know that he was going to have to head back. Now, in 1980, I was lucky enough to win the DM Invitational. Jim was one of the judges. And I was very honored to have won by 1 point out of the 300 points total from the 3 judges.
Errol,
Who was second?
You know who was second. Errol was
That's right.
second, yes.
No, me.
I thought you were third, that Bob Blake was second.
No,
You were second?
I think Errol
Okay.
beat him out. In fact, I'm almost positive.
Yeah.
But lo and behold, they picked me as the best for whatever bizarre reasons, and that's how I really came to Gary's attention. That and one other incident involving people in the borderlands. But this led up to then somebody in marketing had the idea of starting a D&D fan club, and they had come up with a name for it, the Role Playing Game Association. And they decided to turn it over to me. I seem to be a doer, get things done type guy, so they turned it over, and instead I gave them a multi-game, pan-industry, support group for all role players, and that encountered some opposition within some of the management of the company, and it got pulled back to just promote TSR games, etc. But it's gone back and forth since then. But that all turned out well enough, and in the course of that, I wrote 4 different modules that we published, the original R series, 2 of which got combined into a standard mainline module, Egg of the Phoenix, by Paul Jacquets, now Janelle Jacquets, and it's always great to see her here. And at some point, after getting to know Gary and we were hanging together, went out to his place with Marcel Freudeval, a French guy who had worked with Jeu Descartes over there, and came over to visit, and the 3 of us like threw together Monster Manual 2 out at Gary's house over a weekend. He had gotten about half of it on ideas, and we just started tossing in all kinds of things. But Gary and I got to be fairly good friends, much the same way that Tim in the 70s had been Gary's right arm confidant and so forth, synergizing in ideas and creative juices. After Tim left, just a couple of months after I arrived, eventually I moved into that position, and Gary thought about it and eventually named me his essentially right arm. Creative aide to the chairman of the board was the technical title. So it was way cool. Not only was I in Mecca after being, you know, a typical gamer admiring from afar in the 70s, and being lucky enough to get hired, and then being lucky enough to get picked to start this club, and then getting just the supreme, above all, actually personally getting to know the guy, the mover and shaker of this entire industry. He had fights about it with some of the other people, but he decided that they needed somebody to write a really mass marketable version of D&D. Even the one that Tom Moldvay did, they felt, in general, was a little too gamer oriented, less comprehensible by the mundanes and so forth. So they were looking for something they can stick on a shelf at Sears that you can pick up and play. So I had very strict, very narrow guidelines on what to do, how to do it, and also when I was doing Redbox, the now infamous Redbox D&D, which is much more famous around the world, by the way, than it is in North America. Over there, their first exposure to D&D was often, to my chagrin, my set, the first one translated into Italian, into Finnish.
44 languages.
Yeah, 44 languages and all, just incredible coverage here. So I got fan clubs over there, whereas over here, yeah, I'm one of the also-rans because everybody's playing a D&D over here. Thinking of D&D as in the Redbox as kiddie D&D. But so I was, while I was working on that, we were testing it using secretaries in the offices who didn't play the games, the executive secretaries, to read through the intro section and see if they could understand it, things like this.
And not one of them was ugly.
Yeah, they were all pretty, all those executive secretaries. I think that's a prerequisite for getting hired to be an executive secretary. But Gary was on me every sentence, every paragraph of the way. Everything I wrote was intensely scrutinized. We went back and forth. I remember on one specific incident, it was almost 3 days to decide on just 2 words in this one sentence and so forth. It was extremely fine-tuned, and that was as much or more Gary's work as it was mine. And although he got the usual Gygax and Artisan credit up front, compiled by, edited by, whatever, in my case. I wrote every word of it, but it was under his intense tutelage and supervision. Again, I was blessed to have the ability to work that closely with Gary on that. Expert went a bit easier because it was essentially an easy update to the original, most excellent Cook Marsh rules, and Steve Marsh was just here for the last hour. A lot of people don't realize he had such a hand in the development of the game there, but then I proceeded to take it a lot further then with the Companion Masters and Immortal sets. But that's how somehow I got picked to do it. It was just right place, right time, the right luck, you know. Didn't make a penny off of it other than my standard salary. That was standard procedure for TSR. I wish I got any royalties on it. Not a chance on that.
I got royalties.
Yeah, Jim got royalties because he kept getting hired and fired and hired and fired and things like that. So it wasn't his fault getting fired. If you recall, those of you who remember back in the 80s, TSR would project, oh, look, we grew this much this year, so we're going to do 10 times as much next year. And they'd hire a whole bunch more people. And then the realities of business would kick in, and there were these ups and downs and these waves of layoffs and all that. The only reason I escaped those layoffs really is because I was working hand in hand with Gary the whole time. I was like the one person he would not get rid of.
Anything you would have done differently about the writings?
Anything I would have done differently? Honestly, I don't think so. I might have developed expert a little further. I'm the proudest of companion because all these references over the many years, right from the original set and campaign games and becoming a Baron or whatever, there were never any specific rules. I mean, there was all kinds of prices for building a Barbican and, you know, and the crenellations and building your castle, but how do you rule? You know, and it's all, well, whatever the DM wants. So I actually had the opportunity to codify that for the first time. I think that was my biggest influence on the game, really. But no, I did not dumb down, I feel, the red box. It wasn't written in a tone that was insulting. Perhaps the principles were so basic that anybody who already knew the game might have felt it was kiddie D&D. But in the long run, I've been honored to be told several times that it has withstood the test of time as well. I wrote it more than 25 years ago, and people still like it and appreciate it and use it. It makes you feel old a little bit, makes you feel real warm inside for somebody to say, wow, they introduced me to their kids, and hey, I started on your red box, you know, and my gray hair gets grayer and so forth. But it is, I've been honored to have been in the position to accomplish that.
Let me take that question. I want Tim to take that question too, because I want to hear what Tim thinks. But there's only one thing in my 20 plus years at TSR that I would have liked to have done over. In the early 90s, I was the vice president of production and kind of spearheaded what we did. And generally, we did a great job. But the one thing that I didn't do was I didn't pay any attention to the younger crowd. We owned the 11, 12, and 13-year-old boy. You knew about us, you wanted to play our stuff, you even played our stuff over computer games. But I didn't even care about the 8, 9, and 10-year-olds at all. We did a little Marvel stuff and kind of aimed it at the younger section, but I really, as the guy who put out product and suggested product, I really should have done something to capture the younger crowd with D&D and AD&D. And so my one big regret is not doing a basic something that 8, 9, and 10-year-old could play and like. And Tim, would you do something over?
I don't know. I'm trying to think about that. I see a lot of what I did and what a lot of people, I've been very blessed since I came back to gaming and by having complete strangers stop and shake my hand and tell me what it meant to them. And at the time, it was our job. We're having a great time, don't get me wrong. We're having fun. But man, we were poor. We're paying ourselves $100 a week. Gross. And having a great time and making up games and doing all this kind of stuff. I don't know what we would have done differently. It worked. You know, I mean, I had a revelation, one of those moments when I was watching the second Hobbit movie, and it came to me that we cut down the trees and pulled out the stumps that grew out of. That was kind of like, we made a neater movie, you know. So I feel very fortunate. I had a great friend in Gary. I was there at a time of great turmoil, which is the main reason that I left. It was because of the turmoil and the power fighting that was going on in there. And I had a young family, and I didn't need that. And conditions became intolerable. I wish we could have convinced people that we weren't just fantasy. All right, because I had to kind of give that up. Dave Trampier and I, we were the closet tankers. And I tried so hard with Little Wars to reach the historical market and the miniatures guys. And we never did because they didn't take us seriously. And I wish I could have found a way to do that. I just framed the original art from #1 and picked it up the morning that I flew here. So I'm kind of excited. I got to go home and figure where that's going to go. I wish Little Wars had done better. I wish we hadn't had a merger. Joe Orlowski did a great job when my necessity to let somebody else oversee it came about. Joe did a great job, but we just never could get past the fact that people thought we were those fantasy folks. We did a couple of really good historical rule sets. We put out a couple of very good historical board games, but nobody took us seriously. I wish we could have addressed that differently. But I guess that would have meant having our cake and eating it too, so it wasn't what it was. That's my only regret, that, I had to can Little Wars when we had to merge them, that's all.
Now, of the three of us, Jim probably had the opportunity to have the most influence on what products and product lines TSR was going to produce. He was more in management for quite a while. Whereas Tim and I were, although we were confidants and this and that, it was basically we know what job we got to do, we got the job done. We weren't in the business of deciding what TSR was going to do in general. One of the things I always wish we'd have done was pyramided out, not D&D for the mass market, but storytelling and role-playing for the mass market. Maybe a role-playing game technically, but called something generic like storyteller, real light, almost no mechanics, but something your typical mundane, non-gamer can sort of start reading through and get the point across that this is just like reading a novel or story, but you're going to make up the story, and not just you, but other people are going to help make up the story. Get it across some way like that. Just use six-sided die because the other stuff scares some people, I think something like that properly done, probably from Hasbro, could really make huge inroads and bring what I feel are the incredible benefits of role-playing, stimulating your imagination, your interpersonal skills, things like this as a wonderful social pastime. That's most of my games come down to that. People interaction, that's what it's all about.
I want to speak to that.
If something like that could be developed and truly mass marketed, I think it could catch on big time, not just Western civilization, but globally. Tim?
I want to speak to the part of what you just said. In 77, 78, Gary and I were at a con. It was a lull, we were sitting in the back of the booth, and Gary turned to me and says, what we've done is we've given people that were nerds. We were all nerds, okay, nerds, gamers. I was not a nerd. We were, eggheads, there were, but we have given them a means of social interaction that they never had before. And he was half joking and half serious about it because he was, not quite accepting that it was really as cool as it looked it was, because this is still the rocket, still taking off. And I spoke to him again a couple, 3 years before he died about that, sitting out on his porch one morning, and I said, there's a lot more articulate nerds and geeks today, isn't there? And he goes, yeah, isn't it great? And because we kind of got an idea that we were giving people that had trouble connecting to other people a reason as well as a means to find social interaction and not be isolated. And now the permeation of role-playing and through therapies and all sorts of stuff. It's just, that's kind of cool to have been a part of that. That's really kind of cool. And Gary knew it too. And it was kind of like, I don't know, 77. Yeah, we nerds talk to each other, yay! It was cool.
Now, obviously, I'll point out we're old farts and we don't talk as loud as a lot of the younger talent that comes. So if anybody's having trouble hearing, there's still some seats over here. Feel free to move in.
Next question.
Next question. Yeah. Yes, sir.
What do you think has changed the most about the gaming phenomenon since you guys got started?
Hobby gaming in general, you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay. Shall I tell them about my trip to?
Yeah.
All right. I got out of the hobby for a long. I didn't quit playing games and miniatures. I played them with my friends in Cincinnati, but I went away from the industry for a long time.
Well, you had to. You were wanted, right?
Yeah, that was it. I was a killer. But and Frank and I met, and he talked me into coming back to Gen Con in 2005 or 2006.
Around there, yeah.
And it's a 90-minute drive from where I live in Cincinnati, and I came in on Southeastern Avenue, and I started seeing banners hanging from the light posts that said, of all things, welcome gamers. I thought I had driven through a time warp somewhere, or a space, Jim, I was in Jim's game, I was in another world. Welcome Gen Con, welcome gamers. So, gotta figure that I hadn't been to a Gen Con since 83, 84, this was 2005 or 6. And so I was truly Alice in Wonderland. Just walking around that exhibit hall.
Who's been to Gen Con? Wait, okay, enough people, you know,
Now,
just guns
you know,
are
really?
huge, 30,000
The
people.
reason is because in Lake Geneva, when there was only a few hundred of us and we didn't dress in silly costumes, the locals would go, oh God, they're coming this weekend, and that's when they all went on vacation. You know, Rob Kuntz will tell you that's not true. Bullshit. Rob Kuntz was a resident there and his parents probably did it. All right, that's the change. Even in Lake Geneva, we were strange, and here was Indianapolis embracing us.
Of course, money talks. When in the last years that we did Gen Con in Milwaukee, Milwaukee is such that you go downtown, and when Gen Con hit town, there was no hotel space available within 30, 40 miles. I mean, we just wiped out downtown. It would start Thursday and Friday, and we'd be interacting somewhat with the local businessmen walking around on the streets. But there were more gamers than local businessmen and customers and everything. We just took over downtown Milwaukee. Indiana and Indianapolis has been very accommodating and is much larger. We can blend in. They can have a major sporting event and another convention going, all while we're there. And the great part, as Tim says, is we're all accepted as just another interest group instead of the weirdo nerd, you know, crew like that. We went through our period, I'm sure a lot of you remember, of the Satanism charges and all the misunderstandings.
I was there, yes.
And in retrospect, it has been clearly proven and discovered that whenever anybody has a tragedy, they try and blame some aspect of the life involved, you know, and they latched onto this new thing. They could as easily have tried to prove, no, it's the stuff they put in milk. They all drank milk, you know, and they all went, I mean, you know, but they picked on D&D just because it was new and weird, and we've evolved through all that. So we've gained quite a bit of respectability. Every now and then I do get questions about, well, where I live, it's still very fundamentalist, very Bible Belt, if I can use the term, and there's still opposition to this sort of thing. Do you have any tips on how I can deal with some of these folks? And I say, first of all, you always be respectful of people's beliefs. I mean, you don't rub somebody's face in something if they have problems with it philosophically, nor should you try and argue philosophy with them. I mean, we all have our beliefs, however we derive them. But one of the best weapons, one of the best pieces of ammo I have is to point out that the largest game company on the planet, Hasbro, are the ones who now publish and distribute the D&D game, and it's been around for 40 years. When they're selling, you know, these toys to kids and Milton Bradley games and Parker Brothers and all the classics, don't you think they would have shied away from anything that was kind of weird, you know, like this? They have shareholders, they have PR issues. No, they're running the company that produces this stuff. So it's been vetted, it's been checked out, relax. If it's not your thing, fine, stay away from it. But don't get down on me because it's my thing, you know, and that seems to work reasonably well.
So, and from my point of view, the biggest thing that's happened as role-playing has evolved is a certain company has a tendency to strip out the storytelling elements. As I look at things, I see a lot of cookie-cutter characters. The paladin here is almost exactly the same as the paladin here. He has wonderful powers, he has wonderful abilities, he has really brilliant things he can do, but he's a cookie cutter. And this company that I'm in right now, with these geniuses on either side of me, and I believe them to be geniuses, we really press that storyteller button really hard. You'll look at our products, and there's deep backgrounds and fun story happening in all of them, because the storytelling element is the thing that we like the most. Gary Gygax was the ultimate storyteller, and I'll tell you, when he started doing his stuff in the 70s, he was years ahead of any designer that's out there right this second. And I've done tons of product. I don't hold a candle to that man, but boy, it's fun trying to copy him.
Oh yeah.
And the story element is the biggest deal as far as I'm concerned in designing a product, and I like doing it. But there are certain companies that don't want story elements. They want a lot of characters coming out, produced with great powers. Well, that's okay, but you know, for me, it isn't the characters, it's the story. You know, I have a good friend who passed away, Tom Champney, and he was playing a game with Gary, and it was, let's save the princess. And there were 6 different groups, and they were all trying to save the princess. And so Tom Champney was on one side of the table watching the princess go away, and so he said to himself, well, the objective is to save the princess. I can't save the princess, can I? And Gary said, no, you can't. So Tom shot the princess.
Yes.
It's the story elements that count. It's the stories that you remember. You know, 20 years from now, you're not going to remember some of your characters, like you people that have 20 characters. And I think it's fine that you have 20 characters, but I remember every story that Gary wove for the games that I played with him. And I think that's the big deal. I think that's what you guys are going to take with you. You know, as you play our games, you're going to hear some stories. And you're going to pass those stories on to people. And you know, lately these days, people are saying, and I survived Jim Ward's game. It doesn't happen a lot, but it happens.
Didn't happen today, did it? No.
Sorry.
No. And he got over right on time at 2 o'clock. Damn, last guy died.
Tim. So anyway,
I was in awe how he did it.
the story, I think, is a huge deal that I think a lot of companies, big companies, have kind of passed over in favor of bigger powers and bigger abilities for their characters. And that's okay too, but for me that isn't even 25% of the game.
Let me tap on that. I'll give you a quick exercise to learn what telling stories is about again. All you need is your group. Give them a bunch of ordinary pukey level characters they have nothing invested in. Give them a premise. Your heart is guards, and bad news, the stuff your garden's been stolen, and if you don't get it back, you're dead. Go from there. Let them write the story. There's a premise. What do you do? And as they go, I look and see if the locks have been tampered. No, they haven't. You know, answer the questions because now they're writing the story. You don't need anything behind the screen. Let them write the story. Do that just one time with your group. Take a night off and do that. Because here's how you do it. What are you doing? What are you doing? They tell me, what are you doing? What are you doing? And what are you doing? And while they're telling, each of you are telling me what you're doing, I'm thinking about what I'm going to give you. Just give them a clue, give them a kernel, let them write the story. It's really fun. I've been doing it lately. It's really fun. And he'll know what he's talking about because that's what it is. It's the story.
Now, as game masters, a lot of us have different levels of ability. Some of us really need to have a good regimented order of things to be able to make it through something. Whether it's interactive skills, whether it's creative skills. Sometimes I get a little flustered, and if I don't have it written down, I'll be at a loss. As, okay, what do we do next? Wait a minute. Okay, I've got my notes here. All right, we follow the notes. One of the things in the evolution of role-playing is we've been able to get a better perspective on all the various tools here at our disposal, both from the players and from the game master's point of view. And we've been able to categorize and codify a lot of concepts that back in the beginning it was, well, I mean, we're all new at this, so we're still discovering. So some of that mystery and awe and excitement from the early days isn't here, but on the other hand, we've gained so much better perspective that we can grasp it all and put things in better perspective. And so now we have concepts like sandbox versus railroad games. In a, quote, railroad game, not to use it disparagingly, that's when you sit down in a tournament game, you're going to accept whatever plot is being laid out, and you're going to play through that plot and see how well you do compared to other groups tackling the same plot. So, okay, and the game master says, okay, and in this situation you decide to thus and such. So it's acceptable for the game master to pull strings to a certain extent. Whereas then in Sandbox, you can just get tossed into a setting or a situation, and a really good game master will have assorted notes in different directions that you choose to go, but you're the one making the choices and deciding which way the plot's going to go. And we've developed tools and notes and software, lots of things to enable game masters to pick up ideas that come from the players and make it a player-driven game. And a lot of us have learned and really appreciate how cool that is when you're, as game master, you're actually following the players and their ideas and turning those into whole plot lines. This is really the ultimate for me. You know, when I can switch gears, the whole game just goes in a whole different direction from what I might have imagined. Cool, great, surprise me, I love it. Normally I'm just sitting here reading through my notes and you're playing through my great idea for a plot, right? And when you start entertaining me, hey, yeah, I love it, yeah, shock me, surprise me, make me really work to deal with the stuff you're coming up with. It's great for me. But we weren't aware of any of these techniques, this perspective, you know, in the old days. It's all evolved so wonderfully.
How about some more questions? Errol, don't you have any question at all, buddy?
I would like to know what your products are.
What Eldridge Enterprises products
Yeah, what's
are gonna
coming?
That's worth a mention, I guess, at this point.
be? Go ahead, Frank.
A number of years back, I had a Blues Brothers epiphany. I wanted to put the band back together. I had a mission from God.
And he got us instead.
Some of the wrong things, Frank.
So I talked to various friends of mine, including a guy named Chris Clark, who didn't come down here this weekend, but he worked with Gary closely during Gary's last decade with Hika Forge Productions, producing things for one of Gary's last role-playing games, Legendary Adventures. So he's one of our partners, and then the esteemed Jim Ward and Tim Kask, of course. I had talked to some others, but the idea was, number one, we're all well known enough, we've got cred, we don't need to establish ourselves, okay? So we're going to take we're going into this with a different attitude. We want to get together and write stuff and have fun, but like we don't have to have it done next week. You know, we're not going to starve in the process. We've got families and real estate and assets
I want
and things.
Frank to have it done next week.
Right.
He's the production manager.
My concept was we take the time we need to produce stuff that we would think is worth telling, worth doing. We don't crank something out to fit a production slot. We write the ideas we have and design the production schedule based on what we want to do. It's sort of backwards from a typical business. And with the talent I was able to put together and get these guys, we've been sort of groping around as to, well, what do we want to do? What ideas do you have? You know, it's so wide open. And not having the need to, like when you're starting out, you gotta make enough money to take care of the family and buy a house and try and build a career and all that. We're a lot further down the road to that. So we have more freedoms in some respect. Anyhow, that was the initial concept. It took a couple of years to line up the investments, etc. People have said, why didn't you go Quickstarter? Well, we might for individual projects in the future, but
You mean Kickstarter?
Kickstarter, right? I lined up individual investment finally, and we launched officially as of January 1st. We were sitting around the table at our McOffice. We used to gather at the McDonald's up the street from Jim's house.
Because I was too sick to drive anywhere
Right.
else.
He's had various health problems, heart issues, a lung thing, and we've all had our share of health issues. But we came up with, I like the name Eldritch from Eldritch Wizardry that Tim had worked on.
Yeah.
We knew there was an Eldritch role-playing game out there somewhere, but it wasn't big or anything. So we tried Eldritch Entertainment, Eldritch Enterprises. All right, it's Eldritch Enterprises, and we like Ents, tree Ents, so we called it Eldritch Ent and abbreviated because we can get away with that with the period, whereas Tolkien people will freak if I don't use the period for Enterprise. And we just barely started. We got our first 4 game products out. First 4 game products came out at GaryCon in late March in Lake Geneva. We only did a very limited number of paper copies. And we've been learning the parameters of PDF publishing, how sloppy you got to make the production characteristics because they're liable to put the paper in sideways, for God's sake, who knows? But it's not nice, tight pro publishing, I'll tell you. But what you got to go through to make PDFs, etc. We're not talking good PDFs with layering and hot links and stuff. Not just basic text on a page PDFs, just elementary for now. But we plugged into the basic distribution channel. I brought a copy of my product. We have certain others. We have
Dungeon.
4 things out in the game line at this point, plus 1 anthology of fiction, mostly short stories.
It's a dungeon.
Yeah, don't be pushing mine over.
We just kind of, he wants to know
All
what
right.
the products are. Let's get to that.
Right.
And we'll get you right there.
All right.
We'll get there. All right, so Lich Dungeon is Frank's, and there's many levels that are coming as time goes on. We're going to get them out as soon as we can. All right, Forest of Deceit is a beginner series by Chris Clark, just a wonderful series that has Yetis and all sorts of neat things in it. What's your product?
I'll mention that Chris feels very self-conscious because with other names lined up next to his, he's like, well, who am I in this crew, right? But I've read a lot of his works, and he's been around for over 20 years doing inner city games, and I think he'll become known as a designer equal to us, really. So watch out for that.
If he's lucky, he'll become known as that. Tim, what was your product again?
Mine's Snake Riders of the Arredondo, which I originally wrote for this con 2 years ago as a con one-off. And I'm running twice this weekend. Mine's, I didn't know this, I've written for cons for the last several years. I've written like 9 adventures. And every time I can't resist writing a little background story to, justify what we're doing. I've been told I have something like 20% of a core source book written by now. So I'm just going back and working on some of those, and Frank and I are going to be doing some stuff, and they keep telling me I think out of the box. Probably because I never came out of OD&D. I've never played anything but OD&D, and I stayed completely out of the industry for over 20 years. So I never saw any of this stuff to even assimilate it, which is what we did in OD&D, is steal every idea we liked and put it in our campaign. So I'm